Looking back, it's almost hard to believe how different my life was just a few years ago. I'm Emma, and I'm 32 now. But let me take you back to when everything seemed so much simpler and yet so much more complicated than I ever imagined. I was teaching middle school in Portland, Oregon, a job that I genuinely loved. My days were filled with the familiar routine of lesson plans, grading papers, and those occasional moments of inspiration when a student finally grasps a concept. Outside of school, my life was quiet. I enjoyed solitary walks in the park, curled up with a good book on rainy afternoons, and the peace of a small, orderly apartment. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I was content. Everything started to change the day Alex walked into my life. I remember it vividly. He came into the school library, asking for recommendations on books that could help with a project he was working on. At first glance, he seemed charming, with his easy smile and confident demeanor. But it was his interest in me, not just the books, that caught me off guard. "Hi, I'm Alex," he said, extending his hand. "I could use some help finding the right materials for a presentation. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" His casual tone and the way he looked at me, as if I were the only person in the room, made me nervous. I wasn't used to such attention, but I found myself eager to assist him. Our conversation was light and pleasant, and Alex's enthusiasm about the subject made the interaction enjoyable. Over the next few weeks, Alex became a regular visitor at the library. He often brought me coffee and engaged in cheerful conversation. I found myself looking forward to our chats. He would tell me about his day, his interests, and gradually, I began to share more about myself. It was strange how quickly I grew comfortable with him, something that hadn't happened in a long time. Eventually, Alex asked me out. "How about we grab dinner this Friday?" "I'd love to continue our conversation outside the library," he suggested. I hesitated at first. My life was predictable, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for a change. But Alex's sincerity and warmth persuaded me. I agreed, and that was the beginning of a whirlwind I wasn't prepared for. Our dates were filled with laughter and exploration of Portland. We visited local eateries, walked along the waterfront, and even attended a few cultural events. With each passing day, I found myself more drawn to him. He had a way of making me feel special, something I hadn't experienced in years. The more time we spent together, the more I felt like I was discovering a part of myself that had been buried under years of solitude. The relationship quickly grew serious. Alex proposed one evening during a quiet dinner, his eyes sparkling with affection. "Emma, I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" His proposal was simple yet heartfelt, and overwhelmed by my feelings for him, I said yes. It wasn't long before I met Alex's parents, Diana and Robert. I had heard a lot about them from Alex, but nothing prepared me for the reality. They were older, Diana being 65 and Robert the same age, and their presence was imposing. Their home was grand, filled with opulence and a certain coldness that made me uncomfortable. "Emma, it's a pleasure to meet you," Diana said, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Robert's greeting was equally formal, his handshake firm but distant. They scrutinized me with a gaze that seemed to assess my worthiness. The initial meetings were strained. They seemed to disapprove of my background, my job as a teacher, and even my simple attire. Despite Alex's reassurances, I felt uneasy. It was clear that Diana and Robert had expectations that I didn't meet. Things took a turn for the worse when Diana and Robert insisted on a prenuptial agreement. "It's just a formality," Diana insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We want to ensure that everything is handled properly." Signing the agreement was a blow to my self-esteem. It made me feel distrusted and undervalued. Yet, out of love for Alex and a hope that things would get better, I reluctantly agreed. We had a modest wedding ceremony, and soon after, I moved into Alex's house. Life at the house was different from what I had imagined. Diana and Robert made frequent visits, each one more uncomfortable than the last. They treated me as though I were an outsider, and Alex, instead of defending me, seemed to join in their disapproving attitude. I found myself feeling increasingly isolated and undervalued in what was supposed to be my new home. Then came the turning point in our story, an inheritance from my great-aunt. She left me a substantial fortune, including $15 million, shares in various companies, and a grand estate. The moment the news broke, Alex and his parents' demeanor changed drastically. Their previously cold attitude turned into excessive attentiveness and care, which only made me more suspicious. It was then that I started to see the cracks in the facade. The way Alex and his parents suddenly showered me with affection seemed too calculated. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. Once I moved into Alex's house, I expected things to settle into a new routine, but life had other plans. The grand estate seemed beautiful at first, spacious rooms and elegant decor, but it quickly felt like a gilded cage. The more I settled in, the more I felt the weight of Diana and Robert's disapproval. Alex's parents continued their frequent visits, and each time, I felt more like a stranger in my own home. Diana had a way of subtly undermining me, making comments about the way I managed the household or how I interacted with the staff. Robert's criticisms were more direct. He would often express his disappointment in hushed tones, though loud enough for me to hear. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Diana made her usual visit. She walked into the kitchen with a stern expression. "Emma, the housekeeper mentioned you've been asking her for advice on managing the household. Shouldn't you know how to do this yourself?" I was taken aback. "I'm sorry if I've been a bother," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "I just thought it would be helpful to get her input on how things work here." Diana's eyes narrowed. "Well, let's hope you're not too dependent on others. After all, a good wife should manage these things efficiently." Her comment stung, but I forced a smile and went about my work. Alex wasn't much help in these situations. When I tried to discuss my feelings with him, he would dismiss my concerns, saying things like, "They're just old-fashioned. You know how my parents are. Don't let them get to you." I wanted to believe him, but it was hard to ignore the growing sense of unease. Then, one day, the reality of our situation took a darker turn. I had been busy at school when I received a call from a lawyer. My great-aunt had passed away, leaving me a substantial inheritance. The details were overwhelming: a fortune of $15 million, shares in several major companies, and a grand estate. At first, I was in shock, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how this inheritance would change our lives. I hoped it would improve things, but it seemed like the opposite was happening. The moment Alex and his parents learned about the inheritance, their behavior toward me shifted dramatically. Alex became unusually attentive. He was suddenly very interested in my daily activities, always asking about my plans and trying to be more involved in everything I did. Diana and Robert also began treating me with an exaggerated kindness. Diana would drop by with gifts and try to engage in friendly conversations, while Robert seemed to make an effort to be more cordial, even offering to help with some of the estate's affairs. Despite their sudden change in attitude, I remained cautious. Their previous behavior had left a deep impression, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My suspicions were confirmed one evening when I overheard a conversation between Alex and his parents. I had been working late in the study, and the door was slightly ajar. I heard Alex's voice, low and conspiratorial. "We need to get Emma to have a child soon. It's the best way to secure our share of her inheritance." Diana's voice was just as cold. "We'll need to be careful. If she starts to feel pressured, she might back out. We need to make it seem like it's her idea." I felt my heart drop. The betrayal was crushing. They weren't interested in me for who I was. They were only interested in the wealth I brought into the relationship. The realization hit me hard, and I knew I had to make a decision. The following day, I confronted Alex. I heard your conversation last night. I need to know what's going on. Alex's face turned pale. He stammered, trying to come up with excuses, but I could see through his lies. It's not what you think, he said weakly. We were just talking about future plans. I wasn't buying it. I know what I heard. I can't be part of this anymore. That was the turning point. I realized that my relationship with Alex was built on deception and manipulation. I had to take control of my life, no matter how difficult it was. I started making plans for my next steps. The first thing I did was consult with a lawyer about my inheritance and ensure that my assets were protected. I also began preparing myself emotionally and mentally for what was to come. The journey ahead was going to be challenging, but I was determined to stand up for myself and reclaim my life from the grip of deception. It was clear that I needed to regain my independence and redefine my self-worth, away from the shadows of betrayal. I couldn't stay in that house a moment longer. The more I thought about Alex and his parents' schemes, the clearer it became that I needed to act quickly and decisively. It wasn't just about my inheritance. It was about reclaiming my life and self-worth. The day after our confrontation, I moved out of Alex's house. The process was both liberating and daunting. I packed my essentials, leaving behind the luxury of the grand estate for a modest apartment in downtown Portland. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The small space was cozy and intimate, a stark contrast to the opulence I had come from. But it was a fresh start, and I needed that. I also began working with a lawyer to handle my inheritance. I wanted to make sure that Alex and his parents wouldn't have any claim to it. The legalities were complex, but I was determined to see it through. The $15 million I inherited, along with the shares and estate, needed to be secured properly. The thought of losing it to their manipulative schemes was unacceptable. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I made plans to use part of my inheritance for good. I started by donating a significant portion to charities that supported education and women's empowerment. It felt like a way to turn my painful experience into something positive. I also had a dream that had been on the back burner for years, a bookstore. I had always loved books and wanted to create a space where others could share that passion. With the financial stability my inheritance provided, I decided to make that dream a reality. I found a quaint location in a lively part of town, and soon enough, my bookstore was taking shape. Starting a bookstore wasn't just about business. It was about healing. I poured my energy into creating a warm, welcoming space filled with books and community events. It became a place where I could connect with others who shared my love for literature. It was therapeutic to see people find joy and inspiration in the same way I did. But the emotional journey was just as important. I started attending therapy sessions to help me process everything that had happened. Talking through my feelings helped me gain clarity and strength. I learned to confront my fears and embrace my own worth without letting the past define me. One day, as I was setting up a book display in my store, I received an unexpected visitor, Diana. She walked in, her demeanor as cold as ever. She had always been controlling and manipulative, but seeing her now, I felt a strange mixture of anger and calm. "Emma," she said with forced politeness, "I came to see how you're doing. Alex and I were concerned about you." I looked at her with guarded eyes. "I'm doing just fine, Diana. I'm getting back on my feet and focusing on what's important to me now." Diana's smile faltered. "I hope you're not holding any grudges. After all, Alex and I were only trying to ensure the best for you and for our family." Her words were infuriating, but I managed to keep my composure. "It's clear to me now that you were never interested in what was best for me. You were only interested in what you could gain." Diana's face tightened, and she left the store abruptly. It was the closure I needed. I didn't need their validation or approval anymore. I had found my path and was moving forward, one step at a time. As I settled into my new life, I found a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The betrayal from Alex and his family had been painful, but it had also been a catalyst for my personal growth. I learned to trust myself and embrace my independence fully. The journey wasn't over, but I had come a long way from where I started. My bookstore was thriving, and I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not for what I had. I had regained control of my destiny and rediscovered my self-worth. My bookstore quickly became a community hub, and it was more than I had ever dreamed. Every day, as I greeted customers and engaged with fellow book lovers, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was my space, created from my dreams and resilience, and it was thriving. It was a place where I could share my passion for literature and foster connections with others who appreciated the same things I did. I continued to invest in causes close to my heart. The charitable donations I made with my inheritance were changing lives, and knowing that I was making a positive impact in the world was incredibly fulfilling. It gave me a sense of purpose beyond my personal recovery and reminded me that my experience, however painful, could lead to something meaningful. Despite the positive changes in my life, there were still moments of reflection. One evening, as I was closing the bookstore, I found myself looking back on everything that had happened. I had faced betrayal and manipulation, but those experiences had shaped me into a stronger and more self-assured person. It was bittersweet to acknowledge how much I had grown, but I was proud of my resilience. I remember one particular day when I sat in my small but charming apartment, sipping coffee and reflecting on my journey. I felt a sense of completeness that had eluded me for so long. My life was now filled with purpose and joy, far removed from the deceit and control I had once endured. One evening, as I hosted a small book reading event at the store, I took a moment to look around at the faces of the people who had come to support me. I realized that I had built a new community of friends and supporters who valued me for who I was, not for what I had. The sense of belonging and appreciation I felt was a stark contrast to the cold indifference of Alex and his parents. As the night ended and I closed up the store, I raised a toast to myself. It was a simple gesture, but it represented so much more. It was a celebration of my journey from betrayal to empowerment, from heartbreak to happiness. I embraced the uncertainties of the future with confidence, knowing that I had the strength to face whatever came my way. In my quiet moments, I often think about how far I've come. I've learned to trust my instincts and value myself. My experiences, though painful, led me to rediscover my true self and find a life that is fulfilling and authentic. I've learned that true strength comes from within, and that no matter how dark the path may seem, there is always light at the end. As I continue on this journey, I hold onto the lessons I've learned and look forward to the future with hope and excitement. My life is now a testament to resilience and self-worth, and I am ready to face whatever lies ahead with an open heart and unwavering confidence. Here's to new beginnings and to the endless possibilities that await.